Hi, Cara.
Hello, Vanessa. How are you?
I'm feeling so joyful.
Oh,
Just
you're
kidding.
mocking me. Oh, your mockery will get you nowhere.
Except it's still on this podcast. Uh, the mockery relates to the topic of this week's episode. And it was one that you've been working very hard, diligently, persistently, and tenaciously to get me to record. And it's not that I didn't want to record it, it's just that I wasn't in the mindset to record it. So, do you want to talk about what inspired the topic we choose, Joy?
You mean why I wouldn't shut up about the
Why
importance
you
of
were like
this
a dog
episode?
with a bone? Yes. That.
Really, I was like, no, I wasn't a dog with a bone. I was on your pant leg, like, Vanessa. Yes, I want to talk about it. I want to talk about why we're talking about joy because it impacts every corner of what we do. Okay, so let's start here. It's our differentiator. I mean, talking about hard subjects joyfully, laughing, engaging each other, engaging people around us, being able to crack up. That is something we do differently. We're going to talk about that. If we don't laugh, we cry. We're going to talk about that. There are real biological and physiological sequelae, consequences of not being joyful and of being the opposite of joyful, completely stressed out and downtrodden and, cortisol heavy, cortisol laden human beings. This is not a healthy status. And we're going to talk about that.
What are sequelae?
Sequelae. Oh, it's a new word. Happy new word. It's the medical word for consequence. It's a downstream consequence. So like the sequelae of my not giving up on recording this episode is that we are now recording this episode and we are doing it with joy. That's a good example of sequelae.
And how do you spell it? SEQU.
You're really trying to distract from the
No, I'm
point at
not. I'm
hand.
very interested in it because we talk all the time about consequences, and I'm so tired of the word consequences.
Oh, good. Okay. Sequullae.
Oh, the plural. AE.
Yes.
Okay.
You could have a sequela.
Okay. Right.
But I'm a glasses half full kind of person. So I have sequelae. Yes.
Oh, yes. Here we go. We're not straying from the topic. Yes, you are. Optimist.
But here's what I want to say. I want to start with where this started and why I would say it was at the end of the summer when I started coming at you with this idea. So it's been a minute.
Folks, it's November 1st, just so we're clear.
Finally prevailed. So I got into this routine over the last year or so of swiping onto the home page, like the left swipe of the home page of my phone, and up pop, I can turn on my flashlight, I can turn on my camera, whatever. It has the photo of the day, which I'm just such a sucker for the little photo collage of the day. But also Apple News shows up on my phone. And Apple News, whether you subscribe or not, Apple News will show up on your phone. And Apple News gives you 4 stories, 4 headlines, right? And starting this summer, I started noticing that at least one, often 2 or even 3, were totally catastrophic headlines. And they weren't even like climate change is going to end the world, which is very catastrophic and terrifying, but also like has a little bit of basis in science. No, it was stuff like woman's head found in dumpster.
Oh,
and this is like, right? This is Apple News.
And I feel like, in fairness, I feel like my Apple News feed is like, there's always a story about the royal family. There's always a story about a terrible bride.
Yes.
Was for a long time a J-Lo Ben Affleck story, although not so much anymore. And then some just horrific things. So I don't know. There must be an algorithm or something, and I must have looked at something. So I get like idiotic crap on top of like devastating.
I actually looked it up, and I actually went into my phone and tried to change the publications from which my Apple News was drawing, because you can do that. And it didn't change a thing.
I get a lot of People Magazine.
People Magazine is like
I mean,
think,
I
yeah, it's
enjoy,
fair.
like, it's
Fair.
a lovely, I once dated a guy in the days when people actually bought magazines. I got a subscription to People magazine, when they were like, for $4 you can get 87 issues a year. And I was like, yeah, I'm earning my own money, I'm going to do that. And I was dating a guy, and he was like, this is how I knew he wasn't for me. He goes, I can't believe I'm dating someone who has a subscription to People magazine. And I was like, F you, buddy. Like, don't join me.
That's so funny.
Don't join me. Don't judge me. Which, Cara, is relevant to the point about finding joy. Continue.
It's also relevant to the point that you were on a path to becoming an honorary doctor as early as in your young adult dating days, because what's the commonality there? Every doctor's office had People magazine. Okay.
It was the best part about going to the doctor was
100%.
like looking through the People magazine. Yes.
100%. Okay. So I'm starting to like really get annoyed with Apple News. And then a couple weeks ago, I was doing an event in LA with Emily Oster, who, has written a number of books. She's been on this podcast. She has a site called Parent Data. She's a wonderful economist from Brown who collects data on parenting and on a whole host of physical and psychological and developmental studies. And she answers questions using data. And we did an event at a bookstore in LA, and we talked about the data on stress. And I opened it by saying, okay, Emily, I want to read you the headlines on my Apple newsfeed, because I think this is contributing to this sort of deep, deep foundation of stress in every corner of our life. And I start reading the headlines from my phone, and in pops a New York Times news alert. And I cannot remember what it was because it was so bananas, but it was something along the lines of, I don't know, dead woman found strangled in her garage. But it was a New York Times news alert. Okay. And I was like, what is happening, Emily? You can't make this up. What is happening? And then we did a whole session on the data around stress, which I want to get to in this podcast. But my whole point here, 5 minutes into this podcast, my whole point is we sit, given what we talk about and what we do, we sit at the intersection of a fear-mongering culture and talking about something that causes a lot of stress and fear. And I think it's so important for us to recognize and shine a light on the fact that that doesn't mean you have to do it with a stress-inducing tone or delivery, that there are so many ways into these conversations that come from a place of maybe they're not always joyful, but they can at least be net neutral. They don't always have to be scary, screaming headlines. The anti-drug campaigns of the 80s and 90s did not work when they were fear-mongering. Fear-mongering grabs clicks, but it does not translate into changed behavior. And so, or most of the time, it does not translate into changed behavior. So like, I just want to talk about it. And I want to celebrate the fact that we do this with joy. And I want to talk about ways that all of our listeners can continue to implement joyful messages and joyful conversations, even when what they're talking about is hard.
Take a breath. Okay. First, I'm going to list all the things we talk about that could be absolutely terrifying and third rail and untouchable, right? Let's start with sex and drugs and alcohol and romantic relationships and ended friendships and weight gain and weight loss and body image and social media and technology and independence and dun 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 pornography.
And you forgot about the ACEs and gambling.
Right. So ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, abuse, assault, divorce is considered an adverse childhood experience. Food insecurity.
Again, though, with porn, because that's really important.
I will do my again. We talk about all the really, really, really hard, scary stuff that kids go through when growing up. And we talk about how those experiences impact their brains, their memories, their development, their future of their relationships, their sense of self, right? This is no joke. And at the forefront of all of it is, here you go, Cara, dun, 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 pornography. And I'll use that example to start. And we're going to like back into all the other stuff. We're not going to go topic by topic by topic, but we are going to talk about, yes, all these things are super important and they impact the future direction of kids' lives and the relationship those kids have with the beloved, trusted adults in their lives. And we can do it with joy, and we can do it with humor, and we can do it with laughter. And I will start.
You got to describe what you do on stage. Will you start there?
So for those of you who haven't had the immense privilege of seeing Cara and I do our keynote, which is actually so fun and we never get tired of it. And we sit there and like watch each other adoringly and still laugh at the jokes we've heard over and over and over again.
They're so funny.
Because they're so funny and we're like the biggest dorks on the planet. At the end, we talk about crushes and we talk about pornography. And we talk about how beautiful and wonderful and thrilling and sometimes heartbreaking crushes are. And then we talk about how at the same time, kids are being literally at the same ages that they're having crushes, kids are being exposed to porn. And then Cara talks about the data of porn and how the average age of exposure is 12 in this country and 15% of 10-year-olds have seen it, right? And it's like
basically, I'm the Apple News.
Cara is the Apple News.
I'm Apple News.
She is the Apple News in that moment. She just dumped into your news feed in like the most terrifying way. At which point I'm always like, what would you guys do if we were just like, and thank you so much, good night.
But you're even funnier than that. You're like, thank you, Cleveland. Good night.
Right. I do the like comedian. I do the like comedian close, which is like, thank you so much. But we don't do that. We then move on.
Well, everyone cracks up is what happens.
Everyone cracks
really
up.
Important.
And they take a breath. And then we're like, okay, here's how to talk about porn.
That's right.
And that little example is like a paradigm for how we can and hopefully do address many, many, many of these difficult topics. And I think, Cara, what would be helpful is to sort of juxtapose some tough topics and like how one's instinct based in fear and worry might cause one to handle that topic versus how, if we approach it with joy, we can be more effective and make things less stressful.
Right. Because what I don't want to do is confuse anyone about the importance of giving fact and giving basic information that is generally not super joyful, right? So we are not suggesting you not share that information.
And we're not suggesting like, woohoo, porn, everybody go watch porn, like all you 12-year-olds. Like, we're not suggesting that. It's basically about the wrapping for the conversation.
Yes. So like, I mean, the first example that comes into my mind is sex, talking about sex, which is something when you get it, Vanessa and I have this thing we do when we speak where somehow one of us got dumped with all the really negative slides. Like
somehow the one with medical training got dumped with all the negative slides.
Yeah, I'm like the buzzkill of the talk. And then like Vanessa and her superhero cape come flying. And like when Vanessa opens her mouth, there's literally a collective thought bubble. Like, thank God. So funny.
They love what you have to say. Everybody listens so quietly.
There is a moment
diligently
in every talk where Vanessa uses the line, and it changes in every talk, but where she uses the line, is there a little bile in your throat? And it's always after I've spoken. Again, case in point, joy. Okay, so when we talk about porn, you do this great thing where you talk about, in order to talk about porn, you have to talk about sex. And we start with very foundational information about how to talk about sex, which we've done on this podcast before, and we don't need to get into details, but we'll link in the show notes to those episodes because I think they're really, really important. If you haven't ever listened to them, to take a listen and figure out, how do you do this? It's a lot in a non-Apple News kind of way. You know, what you do is you get into sex by talking about love. Now, we work with a lot of people who are experts in this field, and every single one of them does it this way. This is not like the Cara and Vanessa trademarked approach. This is what I would call the standard of care. This is the way we should be teaching about sex. This is how the Dutch do it. It works. You focus on love and connection and feeling good, and you start from there because sex is not something to be feared. And frankly, sex is something that every single one of these kids that we're having these conversations with will grow up to do. And so,
well, not every single one, but like
that's true. But
the majority,
vast majority, right? Will. That's a very fair point. So, starting from a place of joy, it's not like this isn't even a framing thing. This is like it should be joyful and it should be positive and it should feel great, and that's the goal. So let's start there, and then we can talk about the consequences of sex. Then we can talk about STDs and STIs. Then we can talk about, pregnancy. Then we can talk about all of it. But I feel like that's one really good example.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like the standard of care is talk about love and connection and respect and consent and all of that stuff. But all of us do it differently. I mean, we work closely with Shafia Zaloom, who's really like the consent guru. And she wrote the consent lessons in our curriculum. And we talk about love. We all talk about love, but we do it differently. And so much about creating a connection with joy with the kids in your life is actually being authentic to who your kid is and what feels joyful and funny and engaging to them, and also what's authentic to you and what feels funny and authentic and engaging to you. And when you talk about sex, for example, and this is not like curating your kid's sexual journey, this is not narrating for them what should happen. It's really about, what are the values in your family, in your personal relationships? What are the values you hope your kid espouses? But there's ways to do that in funny ways. And listen, not everybody is funny, right? So for some people, Cara, you are very, very, very funny. You were like, there was like a pause where you were like, wait, are you about to say I'm not funny? I'm very
funny. But I am living proof that not everyone finds everyone else funny.
Right. But your humor
is very funny to me.
Is funny to you, and it works in your family.
Sure.
Your sense of humor.
With that story.
Your sense of humor in my family, with 4 children who were raised by a sardonic British father, would not be found quite as funny, even though
land differently at your dinner
even
table.
Though they love you very much and they will humor you and be like, okay, Cara, sure, no problem.
But I have gotten from your kids, just for the record, because this podcast will live in perpetuity, I have occasionally gotten, that was actually funny, Cara.
Actually. So it's part of it is about like what feels authentic to you. And in some households and in some relationships, joy seems different, hits different, feels different. And we're sort of narrating one path, and you will figure out what's right for you. I want to talk about drugs and alcohol.
I was just going to say, here's your brain on drugs. That's exactly where I was going to go.
So for those of you who are younger than we are, you may not have grown up with the ad about 2 fried eggs in a cast iron pan.
Is it cast iron? That's very specific.
I don't know. We have to look it up. It was a high flame situation. The eggs were really frying. I have to look and see. The eggs were, sizzling like crazy. And the ad was about the eggs were, this is your brain. And then they crack the eggs into the pan and they start frying the hell out of them. And then this is your brain on drugs, as in drugs fry your brain. And that was the campaign.
In case you did not get that through line. Yeah, they really hammered it home.
They really hammered it home. And that was the anti-drug campaign. And
it worked not at all.
And it worked not at all. Now, some of you may remember there was another ad campaign of tiny little singing pills. And the campaign sounded like this. We're not candy, even though we look so fine and
Where did
dandy.
You grow up? Oh my God.
New York.
I've never heard that.
If you never heard that ad, okay, so we're going to try to link to both of these
I like
ads.
how you answered that honestly. New York.
As if you didn't know I grew up in New York. And it was a campaign about how there are pills that look like candy, but they're not candy. They're actually medicine or medication, and you shouldn't eat them. And it's 40 years later, and I still remember that song. Now, given the rash of children eating their parents' high dosage THC edibles that are literally look like candy, I feel like we might need to bring back that ad campaign and revamp it a little bit. Yep. But the point is, I do really remember the campaign that was like funny and sort of creative and cute and all of that. I don't know the efficacy of that campaign. I have to do a little bit of research. But I say all of that because I had a conversation with one of my kids. It was recently Halloween, and he's now in college, which of course is like the greatest fear for all parents are, unsupervised kids going out on Halloween and all the things that can happen. Again, we grew up in the fearmongering 80s with like razor blades and the candy and everything else. And he said, oh, we're going to this concert. And like, as my mouth was opening to be like, hey, he goes, and don't worry, I know, like, don't take anything from anyone. And like, God knows who's there and what they're handing out and what they're offering. And then he started to giggle and I started to giggle. And I was like, great, you just saved me from what I had to say. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for hearing me. And we both giggled a little bit and then we moved on. And I don't say that because I think I should win Mother of the Year because my kid could repeat back to me something I've said to him 4,000 times. I say it because he heard me. He's telling me he heard me. We could chuckle about both that it's actually something kind of scary. And so we could kind of laugh at how scary it is. And we could laugh at the fact that like I didn't need to say it 4,001 times.
And I think he could also talk to you and say it in that way because you didn't hold a threat out over his head. If I find out you take drugs, right? That you've chosen, and I believe you've probably chosen 25 ways into these conversations, right. And you felt out with each of your kids how they land, because certainly that's how we all go about it. But threats don't work. Fear-mongering doesn't work. You can try those, and maybe it's a piece of hay on the haystack of the conversation. But ultimately, what you're doing in this conversation, you're not really choosing joy so much as you're choosing net neutrality. You're not going dark. You're not going angry. You're going real, and you're opening the door, not just to the conversation in the moment, but to him coming back to you and him saying, hey, you know what actually happened that night? This is what I saw, or this is what happened. And when we choose the catastrophizing approach, what we do is we slam that door shut and we say to our kids, not only is this unsafe and unhealthy, but if you engage in it, you are making decisions that I don't agree with. And then the mental math they do is like, well, I made the decision you didn't agree with, so I probably shouldn't talk through that decision with you. And again, I don't want this to be confused with you give them permission to do everything, but it's all tonal. It's all about how we approach it. In my family, we grew up in a family with lots of addiction. There was a front row seat to all the negative consequences. In my family, less conversation was necessary because there was a lot of visual exemplifying what happens when there's a lot of substance use and a lot of addiction. Okay. In other families, there aren't those examples, and you do need to talk about it in sometimes ways that aren't so rosy, right? Sometimes ways that are a little scary. But in general, what keeps the door open is what you did, right? That's what allows you to be in conversation with a kid who's of legal age. And by the way, has like a good 7, 8, 9 years left before his brain is fully mature and before he can make great decisions. Okay, Vanessa, I want to talk about one more reason why it's important to choose joy or to steer away from always choosing clickbaity, scary, fear-mongering, headliney approaches. Remember the boy who cried wolf?
Yes.
So, I mean, my grandmother that was like her biggest citation was the boy who cried wolf. But it bears relevance here because if everything that we warn our kids against comes in a package of this is bad for you, and this is scary, and this is going to destroy your health or your life or whatever, then when there's something that is truly scary, that is like the next level scary, it will fall on deaf ears. It really comes down to the mantra of that story. Everything can't be the worst thing. And so let's be honest, there's a lot happening in the world that is terrifying. And we, talked about a very long list of it at the top of the podcast. And these include things happening globally, things happening locally, things happening at school, things happening under the roof of your home, things happening inside your body, right? All of it. But if everything is the worst, then how are they supposed to make sense of what's really the worst?
Yeah, Car, I was thinking about this a lot this week. We are recording this episode ahead of the 2024 presidential election. And it also happened to be a very, very stressful, busy week for my kids academically, athletically, with college stuff. Roger and I had very, very busy work weeks. It was just a run-of-the-mill stressful week, and everybody was so tired and just wearing all the stress on their faces, on their bodies, on our skin, everything. And then on top of that, we started talking about the election. And there was a certain point in the conversation when Roger and I looked at each other and we kind of made the call. It was like a tacit agreement that we were going to kind of end the election conversation. It was like this sense that at a certain point, we weren't educating our kids, like we weren't adding to their understanding and their knowledge. We were just like piling stress onto the stress that was there. And we changed the subject and kind of moved on to a sort of neutral topic. And I say that because the stress is there. I mean, the Apple News stories are based normally on actual events that are happening, right? We talk
to the royal
about
family.
I'm very stressed about the royal family. And it's like doubly weird because we're watching Suits. I'm watching Suits with my youngest. And so it's like Meghan Markle, like I can't escape Meghan Markle. Wherever I turn, she's there. But I say all this because it's our job to be the barometer of stress, of the sort of stress joy relationship in our homes. And we are obligated to educate our kids. We are obligated to help them understand what's happening in politics and climate change and school violence and all of that. And at the same time, Car, we talk about this all the time. Chronic stress on people's bodies is a really serious thing. It has true mental health and physiological impacts. And so by not helping balance those things, we're actually adding to the stress. And will you just spend a minute like describing for folks who don't know it what chronic stress does to the body?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's the lowest common denominator of all of this, right? It's the endpoint where all of these paths lead. And it's the reason we're doing this episode. And frankly, it's the reason we choose to approach this topic the way we choose to approach this topic. So when the human body feels stressed out, threatened by something, the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys, Dr. Vanessa, they're hormone factories, and there are different zones inside the adrenal glands that manufacture and pump out different kinds of hormones. And one of the hormones that is produced by the adrenal glands is cortisol. It's the classic stress hormone. And cortisol is released when the body is threatened, when the person is threatened, the animal, I should say, is threatened. And it is designed to take the body and protect it. So what does it do? It diverts blood flow to the muscles so you can get the heck out of there. You can run fast. It shunts blood away from the stomach and intestinal tract where you might be, casually digesting your food and processing, I'm a little hungry now, right? It increases your blood pressure in order to get more blood out into parts of the body that need it, the muscles in particular. It increases the heart rate in order to pump the heart faster, to distribute that blood and oxygen and fuel for the muscles. Right, there's a whole cascade of effects, which, by the way, we teach to kids. Like we have in our curriculum, we have a whole lesson around the stress response, and kids deserve to and need to know what happens inside their bodies as a result of being threatened. So do adults. If you don't know it, like pop over into our membership, take a look at the stress content. It's really approachable. We're happy to teach you because then it makes sense why we should all turn off Apple News, right? Because our stress response was designed to spare us every once in a while. And instead, when we turn on our phone, whether it's Apple News or social media or the call I missed from my mom, who will be on this podcast soon, or, you name it, these are all stressors that pile one on top of another, and they contribute to something that we call chronic stress. This is the endless secretion of cortisol, the endless increase in blood pressure, increase in heart rate, increase in blood flow to the muscles as a get out of there impact. But really, that's not what we need to do. That's not what the body needs to do in response to these stressors, but that's what we are genetically and biologically programmed to do. And then when you think about kids who live in homes where there is trauma, abuse, violence, where they can't necessarily count on a meal, where many kids don't have roofs over their head, their adrenal glands are pumping out cortisol in response to all of those things. This is why it is like a public health mandate that we change the way we message information. And you and I work really hard to try to be part of the solution. But really, Apple News and every major publication in America and frankly, in the world, stop it. Back off on the threats in the headlines because it's not helpful.
And it's not just adults who see those headlines. It's kids on
That's
their
right.
devices and on whatever social media platforms they're on.
Right.
And then everybody's talking about it at school and then, at the dinner table or on the bus so it's our job to help kids manage that stress and to shift the narrative. And partially it's about, what platforms they're on, what devices they use, what notifications they're getting, right? The constant notifications is really bad for everybody, especially kids. Makes it super hard for them to focus. It makes things, again, the adrenaline is like constantly running if the notifications are constantly pinging. And I was thinking recently, Cara, about how do we insert bits of joy in the everyday, and how do we do that for ourselves, and how do we do that for the kids? And I was thinking about strategies that I'm going to use as, the clocks are going to change in New York. It's going to start to get darker. It's going to start to get colder.
The clocks are only changing in New York.
Sorry. My family in England, the clocks change at a different time. Did you know this? That in England,
also, if you're in Arizona, they don't change.
And they never change. So I know it doesn't only change in New York, maybe in Hawaii too. It doesn't only change in New York, but it does not uniform across the world and not everyone changes the clocks. But I was thinking about what are the things I can institute in my life and my family that can bring little bits and pieces of joy. And one of the things that I was thinking about, which we did a lot in COVID and we haven't done in a while, is having a dance party when we do the dishes. So somebody DJs and, cues up a bunch of songs and we clean up, but we also dance and sing and sort of let out all that intense energy. So that was one thing. And then the other thing I was thinking about was I read somewhere, this was probably like a positive Apple News thing, but I can't remember, that it really helps to have like tiny rewards throughout the day that people need, not just like one big reward at night, which for many people is alcohol and it's like not so great for you. So it's like, how do you have little rewards throughout the day? So for me, it's like, what are the hot beverages I have throughout the day? Cara watches me sort of move through a variety of different teas and coffees and all of that. And that's my carrot. That's like my next thing. That's what brings me little bits of joy throughout the day. How wholesome?
It's so wholesome. Yes.
Yes. Your bits of joy are always various bread products.
That's so true.
Like there's the homemade croutons in the salad. There's the bagel. Yes, there's the bagel. There's the granola and the cereal. So I urge everyone listening to think about partially what can we cut back on that's adding stress to our lives that doesn't necessarily need to be there. That's just sort of like casting a pall over our lives. And there are some things, let's be honest, that we can't control, right? Like if there's illness in the family, if there's job stress, if there's like real financial concerns and stressors, like there's certain things we just can't get out from under. And I get that, but there are things we can control and shift.
But I think to that exact point, and it's a perfect place to land the conversation, exactly because there are things we cannot control. We need to learn to keep our powder dry.
Mm-hmm.
We have stress responses built in that are designed to be there to get us through hard moments. The thing is, we're blowing our wad 24/7 across all of these other media that, yes, I did say blown.
You do know what that means. Listeners, enjoy that Cara just said blowing your wad, because it's almost as good as my mother using the phrase money shot in a text with me the other day. And I was like, I don't think she knows that what that means, what she thinks it means. You know that scene in The Princess Bride where Inigo Montoya turns to, I think, Andre the Giant and says, I do not think that means what he think it means, or something like that. I can't remember what it says. Yeah. So we've got blowing our wads and money shot all in one episode. Thank you,
There
Cara.
we go, because we choose joy. But I think it's really important to recognize, like, every single person faces challenge. Some more than others, some more frequently than others. Some are in a moment of it right now. Others won't be in a moment for a little bit. It's really critical to find balance so that when information can be processed without distress and without making us have a stress response, let's do it. Because there's plenty in the world and plenty in our lives that's going to be distressing.
And ask your kids. Like when we talk to kids and we're like, hey, how do you deal with this? Sometimes it's stress. Sometimes it's a bad decision. Sometimes it is joy. And we say to them, how do you deal with that? They have awesome ideas. Like they're like, I play my dance around playlist on Spotify, or I like go run outside, or I do cartwheels, or, I find my stuffed animal and I like talk to it for a little while. Like kids know, but they can't always access it if they're in the midst of what's going on. And so part of it is our figuring out our own stuff, but part of it is our prompting our kids to remember what brings them joy, to figure out those coping mechanisms. And if it's stuff you can do together, great, but it's not always stuff you can do together. And that's also okay. It doesn't all need to be a family activity.
And all of that is true for you too. So it's as much about our kids as it is about ourselves. And with that, Vanessa, I'm going to go figure out how to delete Apple News. I'm going to do it. And I'm just going to look at old video, photo montages that my phone sends me that bring me joy and make me cry just a little bit.
And by the way, the research on crying is really powerful and how
really good for you.
Good it is for you. So
really good for you. I'm going to go get healthy right now, Vanessa.
Go get healthy by laughing, crying, and eating your bagel. Cara, thank you for making me record this episode because
it was fun.
We choose joy.
We choose joy.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.